I wanted to read this letter to Mrs. N. She's obviously anonymous. The editors didn't want to let anybody know her name, but he says, "This is the kind of experience you needed." We don't know what the experience is, of course, but because this is Jung's letters, out of Jung's letters, volume 1. You trust your unconscious as if it were a loving father, but it is nature and cannot be made use of as if it were a reliable human being. It is inhuman, and it needs the human mind to function usefully for man's purposes. Nature is an incomparable guide if you know how to follow her. She is like the needle of the compass pointing to the north, which is most useful when you have a good man-made ship and when you know how to navigate. That's about the position. If you follow the river, you surely come to the sea finally, but if you take it literally, you soon get stuck in an impassable gorge, or you complain of being misguided. The unconscious is useless without the human mind. It always seeks its collective purposes and never your individual destiny. Your destiny is the result of the collaboration between the conscious and the unconscious. So, I won't read the rest of it, but
I like that last sentence.
Yeah. So the point is that you know, our unconscious doesn't have to live in our human world. It doesn't live in our human world. It lives in its own environment, and we don't know where that is. No scientist has been able to tell us yet. But what we do know is that the unconscious gives you guidance all the time. It's telling you things that it thinks you need to know, but it's based on 4 million years of psychic development of the human species. Okay, it's not based on what's happened in the last 100 years, let's say. It doesn't know anything about that. So the advice it gives you has to be evaluated. And so you say, okay, this is the advice I'm getting from my unconscious, but, you know, does that work in 21st century America? That's the question. And so when he's talking about, you know, you can go down the river and you'll ultimately come to the sea, I think he's talking about the river of life, and ultimately you're going to come and die and be absorbed into the collective unconscious again. But if you just go along bump, bump, bump with what the unconscious wants, you're going to end up on the rocks somewhere along the way. And so you have to evaluate. And just as Barbara was saying, you know, you have to evaluate the advice you hear from your girlfriends too. Maybe their advice isn't so good, or maybe they're trying to trick you and make you look stupid, or who knows what. One of the things psychotherapists do is when you get stuck in an impassable gorge, when you're going down the river, they help you out of that impassable gorge, you know, metaphorically. So before we go into individuation, I wanted to just cover one more thing in mythology. And I've been passing around this Alumni review from the University of Rochester, which just came like 2 days ago in the mail, where the University of Rochester is taking credit for parts of Star Wars, and legitimately in some ways. For example, the theme music from Star Trek was composed by Alexander Courage, 41 Eastman composer. I have to confess to the world, said the late Alexander Courage in 2000, that I am not a science fiction fan. Oh, the irony. From its eerie first notes to its arresting fanfare, to its soaring climax, the theme that Courage composed for Star Trek in 1966 is among the most iconic in all film or television. Over his career, Courage was a prominent film and television composer, with credits on films such as Funny Face, Guys and Dolls, Showboat, Dr. Dolittle, and television series Wagon Train, Peyton Place, Daniel Boone, and The Waltons. But it was his work on Star Trek that led to greatest acclaim. Theme music is often at its most resonant when the use of an unforgettable melody somehow captures the feeling and essence of a dramatic world. Courage understood this well, wrote Beale, whose credits include the theme for the Netflix series House of Cards. How could we ever separate the strains of his Star Trek theme from the triumphant French horns and the theremin-like female vocal? When he was hired to compose for Star Trek, he saw it as just another job for just another show. Courage recalled in that same 2000 interview conducted by film and music journalist John Burlingame for METVLegends.org. Little did I know that when I wrote that first A flat for the flute, that it was going to go down in history somehow. It was a very strange feeling, quote unquote. Okay. So it's kind of cool. I mean, does anybody remember? There's a character that I hated who was Barclay. Does anybody remember that character? He was kind of the nerd. It was Reginald Endicott Barclay III. So anyway, this Rochester professor of English was taking credit for the show that created that character. Sarah Higley was in her third year of teaching medieval English literature at Rochester when she drafted a script for Star Trek Next Generation. Having grown up on the original series, she started watching The Next Generation and quickly found herself both intrigued and skeptical. Higley was fascinated by the holodeck, which had become a major feature of the Enterprise starting early in the first season. The holodeck was an enclosed room programmed to simulate any environment and create any holographic characters its users chose. It was a rich source of role play for those who entered it. I suppose, we could think of it as imagination.
So you didn't like him because what?
He was an irritating nerd, and I guess, if you're
Maybe it's a good time to bring up Shadow.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I know. Yes, it is a good time to bring up Shadow. My cheeks are...
I didn't mean to laugh too, but it's so funny.
It is funny. I guess if we're going to watch any television program that has a plot in it, whether it's a comedy or a drama, there's always going to be somebody or something or someone that's going to irritate you. And theoretically, the hero always has to win out in the end and get the girl, whatever it is, right? I started writing this story about Reginald Endicott Barclay, she says, who was not well adjusted, but who was a genius and was admitted into the academy, got on the Enterprise, but gradually started slipping because of his unhappiness and his cynicism into the holodeck. Her intention was to introduce a more three-dimensional character, one more flawed and less heroic than characters such as Picard, LaForge, and Riker. And Barclay modified them in the holodeck. She submitted her script, which she titled Hollow Pursuits, and it was accepted, provided she rewrite it. The show's co-producer, Michael Piller, wanted all the episodes to have a certain quality to them. He wanted them to be upbeat. She says, the producers loved the concept, but were lukewarm about Barclay. They told me, we like the premise, we like the whole idea of holodiction, but you have to have something that this character, Reginald Barclay, will solve so that he stops being a Walter Mitty character and becomes the hero of the day. She responded to the producer's wishes, and when she viewed the finished episode, discovered something startling. When I saw the episode, I realized how much of it was an analogy of me writing an episode of Star Trek, she says. Barclay was an alien element who repurposes the holodeck, refashioning his crew members to serve his psychological needs, but he's forced in the end to abandon the holodeck. He saves the starship from a technical malfunction that threatened to destroy it. At the end of the episode, he bids goodbye to his simulated versions of the crew members to take his place among the real ones. And I thought, my God, that is me. Higley says, I was told umpteen times how I could and couldn't portray the characters. I was projecting that onto Reginald Barclay. Higley has mixed feelings about her experience working with the next generation showrunners. As a scholar, she retains control over her published work to an extent not possible in the world of television and film. But with the compromises she had to make, the episode crystallized a basic truth about virtual reality. It's a wondrous technology with the capacity to enhance our lives in this world, or very often, and at least for some of us, to lead us away from it. On my website is I don't often get comments on the website, but after an article of some sort has had 10,000 hits, and the highest one right now has 250,000 hits. The Big Lie in American Politics is what it's called. And so it's about the lies that not we are being told, but some people are being told about social issues that seem important to them but aren't. Yeah. I wrote it. Yeah. It's been on the website since 2011, so it's had time to collect a lot of hits. But I never heard of the concept the Big Lie when I was in college, and even though I was a history major, I never heard the term, and yet it comes from Mein Kampf. Right. And basically Adolf Hitler said that if you tell a big lie, everyone will believe it, because everybody tells little lies all the time, like, oh dear, your hair looks great today. And, you know, whether you believe it or not, your husband has to say that, right? And
If he wants dinner, he will.
right. Right. So there's always little lies in our families and in our society, but people will never believe. I mean, this was Hitler's concept, that people will never believe that you would be told a big lie. And so if you tell a big lie and then repeat it over and over again, eventually people start to believe it. And we're seeing this in politics, right? And so anyway, in 2011, a friend of mine who I've talked about, my Turkish friend, wrote an article called something about the Big Lie. I forget what it was. And I had never heard the term, but I published her article, and then I said, okay, I'm going to apply this to all the lies that I'm hearing in politics, right? And so 1 week later, I published my article. So that was October 25th, 2011. Okay, within 4 months, every news anchor was talking about lying in politics, and I wasn't hearing it before that. Okay, and by election day, everybody, I mean, all the news about election day 2012 was about lying. Okay, and since then, it's been constant about that. If you put something out and it gets 10,000 hits, it enters the collective unconscious. You get it fed back in certain ways, and I see that very often in my writing. I mean, people don't credit me, but they read it, and then they incorporate it in their own stuff. Okay, maybe it was in the collective unconscious before. I never heard it before, but maybe it was already there. But certainly, after I write something, then I hear about it, you know, about the time that it has 10,000 hits, boom, I come to the conclusion that, who knows, it might be 5 people that, out of the 10,000, there might be 5 that actually read the article, but it's enough to spread the idea. And that's why I'm doing this this group and doing these videos. It's exactly that, to spread the ideas out.
But I think of Trump a lot now when you say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously. I go, oh,
It's like,
no.
how far can you take this? You would think with all this media, this technology, that he wouldn't be able to get away with it. It's like, it doesn't matter. It's like, once you've told it and it's in people's minds, they don't want to hear anything else. They just,
Yeah.
or something. I don't know.
And so the examples I used were abortion. Banning abortion will save absolutely 0 babies because there will be back alley abortions as there were before Roe v. Wade, and it'll be ugly. And my 2 grandmothers had 5 abortions between them, which was something my mother told me on her deathbed. But my grandmothers were Victorian ladies as far as I knew. And so in the 1920s, when it was really illegal, they committed these felonies 5 times, these 2 Victorian ladies. And so there's no doubt, if we ban abortion, we won't save any babies, but what we will do is brutalize our society again, which is what we did. I mean, we made, they estimate 1/8 of the medical profession was committing felonies regularly. About 15% of all doctors were committing felonies. And plus, women were dying from botched abortions and so on, so it was ugly. And, they never say that. And of course, if you tell my daughter, who was born after Roe v. Wade, about this, she doesn't want to hear it. She just wants to save the little babies, and okay, but that's it. You won't save any. and so then there's, besides that, there's obviously fact-free science. Other things like that. But anyway, I want to talk about the moral universe because that's an important issue here. And it gives you a better sense. And I think one thing that we haven't understood from mythology is mythology, but now storytelling and television and movies is how we pass the culture down the generations. Hollywood has been onto this for a long, long time. Okay, they've known it all along, but they never cued any of the rest of us in. But it's time for the rest of us to understand, okay, this is a story, and this story is teaching us X, whatever it is. Good or bad, the gray area villains that, sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad. So anyway, here's William Fitzpatrick, Gideon Webster Burbank, professor of intellectual and moral philosophy. And even though I'm giving this to you, I'm reading it for the purposes of the video. From its very beginning, says William Fitzpatrick, Star Trek explored themes of good and evil, power and moral corruption, peace and inescapable violence, and racism and equality, and in particular took up issues concerning the moral standing of wildly diverse kinds of beings, from humanoids to intelligent energy clouds to sentient androids. Many episodes inspired deep reflection, but one of Fitzpatrick's favorites is The City on the Edge of Forever, which originally aired in the spring of 1967 during the first season. Here's his take. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are transported back in time to 1930s Earth, and Kirk and Spock realize that Edith Keeler, with whom Kirk has fallen madly in love, what else is new, must be allowed to die in a street accident. If she doesn't, the course of history will be radically changed, with the Germans winning World War II and everything the Enterprise crew know of their world vanishing in an instant, having never come to be. The situation raises basic moral questions about how to weigh one person's welfare against the larger good, how to balance special duties to those we love against impartial duties of beneficence, and the potential moral distinctions between letting someone die, preventing someone from being saved, and killing directly, for example, by shooting someone, for the sake of a greater good. One philosophical view, utilitarianism, tends to downplay such distinctions concerning means, holding that all that really matters is acting in whatever way will maximize the overall impartially conceived good. The good is conceived from the point of view of the universe, as Sidgwick famously put it. Often people hear a utilitarian message in Spock's famous quote from The Wrath of Khan, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one." And they might read it into the Keeler case as well. But that is a mistake, I think, and an oversimplification. The heavy focus throughout the series on the importance of individual dignity, freedom, and rights precludes any simple utilitarian interpretation of its moral sensibility. There are also plenty of opposing poles from impartial rationality, personal emotion, and intuition that cannot be codified by any appeal simply to logic. Maybe Spock led us down a primrose path of making us think too rationally in the last half of the 20th century, or the last couple decades of the 20th century. I don't know, maybe. What do you think?
I never bought it.
You never bought it?
No, but I was also, remember, I went into school as an artist.
Right.
And I didn't, and even though I got a degree in philosophy, I could see right away the limitations of logic and rationality. That even as a kid, that seemed apparent to me.
Uh-huh.
I also thought the show was a little black and white. There were some of them I liked.
Well, obviously, lots of television and movie
Especially in that day and age.
events are black and white.
There was one where I can't remember the name of it, it's an obvious name, but there was this device that came in, and anything that was imperfect, it would destroy it. Do you remember that episode? Yeah. And then they had to convince it that it was imperfect itself and it destroyed itself.
My favorite one was Star Trek IV, the movie, where the aliens are coming through the galaxy, crushing everything in their path, and they're trying to figure out what they want, and they want whales. They want to know that there are whales on Earth. And the problem is we've killed all the whales in the 23rd century. So the Star Trek crew has to go back to the 20th century and get to a breeding pair of whales and carry them into the 23rd century so that the aliens will leave. Okay, well, there's one more bit to this that's kind of relevant.
I don't remember that one.
One more bit to this that's kind of relevant, and that's Captain Kirk, he's no Kantian. Okay? Spark relies always on logic, by which he means, roughly, strict rationality. McCoy is the voice of emotionality, emotionally laden human experience and response, and Kirk is often the one putting both elements together, says Fitzpatrick. Kirk also embodies an intuitive sense of when to follow the rules and when to break them. The prime directive, the rule not to interfere with the natural development of alien civilizations, seems to exist primarily to be violated by Kirk. Whenever he judges that it is more important values are at stake, much to the displeasure of the Starfleet higher-ups, there's a certain practical wisdom in Aristotle's sense in knowing when to depart from fixed rules or algorithms. Kirk is much more of an Aristotelian than a Kantian in this sense, relying on virtues and practical wisdom for situational appraisals rather than simply applying rules. His wisdom is limited, of course, to his excessive fondness for aliens wearing miniskirts and sporting 1960s hairdos. I just thought that was a sort of an interesting sum of where we're trying to talk about in terms of of what Jung is talking about, duality and the sliding scale and that sort of thing. And obviously Star Trek and Star Wars were terrific mythological examples, which, I didn't realize we were being fed a myth when I went and saw Star Wars in 1976. I never got that in public school, and I certainly never got it in the United States military public school in Japan. I mean,